Queen Soraya. Two moments were unforgettable in the life of Soraya Esfandiari. One was when she stood by the side of His Imperial Majesty the Shah of Iran at the age of 18 and became his empress. The other was the day she stood on the steps of the plane taking her to Europe and out of his life forever. Only 7 years stretched between the joy of the first and the anguish of the second. 7 years at the end of which she lost the man she loved, her country and her crown, and all for one reason alone. She could not give the Shah the son and the heir he wanted. The story of Queen Soraya and the Shah is one of the most poignant in modern history. Everyone presumed the marriage to be one of convenience. Everything depended on whether she could provide an heir for the peacock throne. What no one had taken into account was the fact that the two people concerned would fall deeply in love. Soraya, a ravishingly beautiful young woman, was the daughter of an Iranian father and a German mother. She had silky raven black hair, high cheekbones, huge dreamy green eyes, and full red lips. Only a fraction of that beauty was evident when, one day in 1950, the Shah saw some rather fuzzy snapshots of her taken in St. Moritz, but they were enough to rouse his interest. Officials at the Iranian court had begun to despair of the Shah ever taking serious interest in what they considered to be a marriageable girl. None of the aristocratic young women they paraded before him at receptions and balls seemed to have touched his heart. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was now 31 years old, imperiously handsome and a fine sportsman and fabulously rich. But he was also a lonely and unhappy man. His first marriage to Prince Fauzia, sister of King Farouk of Egypt, had ended in divorce. Their only child was a daughter, Princess Shehnaz. He knew it was his duty to marry again to secure the Pahlavi dynasty, but he was modern in his thinking and wanted to do, if possible, for love. He was sitting alone one night when one of his mother's ladies-in-waiting and an old friend of the royal family showed him pictures of her niece on the ski slopes in Switzerland. She told him her name was Soraya. "She seems very pretty," he admitted. "What a pity the photographs are not clearer." His obvious interest stirred her to action. She telephoned to London, where Soraya was studying, and ordered more pictures to be taken immediately and sent to her at the palace in Tehran. A few days later, the Shah was presented with clear pictures of the stunning 18-year-old girl laughing among the gold-tinted autumn leaves in St. James Park, London. There was also a studio portrait, serious, dignified, showing the beauty of her slightly oriental features. He studied her face carefully, then said with a laugh, "Well, perhaps this is the one." There was a bustle among the rather formidable women in the Shah's family. His mother, the Dowager Empress, told her daughter Princess Shams, "Fly to London and have a look at this girl." Soraya Esfandiari was the daughter of a Persian diplomat and his German-born wife. Her father, Khalil Esfandiari, belonged to the clan of the Bakhtiari, feuding nomads whose ancestry could be traced back to the 12th century. Soraya was born at Isfahan on 22nd June 1932, spent part of her childhood in Europe, but returned to her birthplace during the Second World War. Once hostilities were over, her mother sent her to finishing schools in Switzerland so that she could absorb the European tradition rather than that of the submissive female behind the veil. She loved Switzerland and considered the years she spent at school there among the happiest in her life. She was already receiving proposals of marriage. All the suitors came from old Iranian families who visited her parents at their house in Zurich and asked for her hand. She was told not to take the proposals too seriously. Her studies came first. To emphasize the point, she was sent to London in the summer of 1950 to perfect her English. That autumn, her cousin, who was studying at the same language school, asked her if he could take photographs of her. They were, he said, for his mother to show to Dowager Empress. She was intrigued and puzzled. When her father wrote to say the Shah had asked for her to be presented at court, she began to have premonitions that her life was about to change. Premonition turned to certainty when Shah's eldest sister, Princess Shams arrived in London, took her to dinner at the Iranian embassy and suggested they flew to Paris together to do some shopping. But the visit to Paris turned out to be far more than a simple shopping expedition. Soraya was schooled in some of the formal protocol and etiquette demanded at court in Tehran. She was taking her first steps towards ascending the peacock throne. Accompanied by her father and Princess Shams, Soraya took the night flight to Tehran on 7th October. She had scarcely unpacked her suitcase when a call came through from the palace. The Dowager Empress had arranged a small dinner at which only the innermost family circle would be present. Though she was tired, she slipped into one of her new Paris dresses and made herself ready. The formidable old lady was waiting for her, seated in a deep chair covered in yellow silk. Members of the royal family were grouped around her. They welcomed her amiably and for 15 minutes questioned her lengthily about her health and the health of her relatives, a mark of good manners in Iranian society. A servant entered the room and announced His Majesty the Shah. The Shah was strikingly handsome in the dress uniform of a general of the Iranian Air Force. Soraya trembled a little when she was presented to him, but managed to bow with dignity. Rather stiffly, he led her to the dining table and beckoned her to sit next to him. Throughout the meal, he gave her his whole attention, questioning her about her studies in Switzerland and England. He too had been to boarding school in Switzerland and knew the country around Lausanne. As the evening went on, the strong attraction between the two of them began to be very noticeable. As they left the palace, Soraya's father asked her, "Well, what do you think of him?" "I like him," she replied. "Are you willing to marry him?" "Do I have to make up my mind at once?" "It would be better," her father replied. "The Shah requested just now that I ask you for your answer this evening." This was all hastier than she had expected. But in her autobiography, Soraya says, "My sensation of pleasure did not leave the room either for surprise or confusion. Without a second's hesitation, I agreed to marry him." Next morning, her photograph was in the world's newspapers. 3 days later, the official celebrations to mark their engagement took place in the imperial palace. The wedding was announced for 27th December. Every day for the next 3 weeks, the young couple went horse riding, driving into the country for picnics, and flying in the Shah's private plane. By the end of October, however, Tehran was in the grip of a typhoid epidemic. Soraya returned from one of her outings with a high color, abnormally bright eyes, and a body shaking with fear. The court doctor was called and confirmed that she too was a victim. For days her temperature raged around 106 degrees and her life hung by a thread. When the crisis had passed, she was confined to bed for 3 months as she fought her way back to health and strength. It was during this period that Soraya and the Shah fell deeply in love. Each day he spent hours at her bedside. He brought her flowers and gifts, and when she began to feel better, had a record player and a film projector fixed up in her room. He was tender and kind, and now she really knew she wanted to marry him. The wedding had been postponed until 12th February 1951. Soraya was still weak, and when the great day dawned, she woke up to find Tehran in deep snow. The doctor insisted she wore thick white woolen stockings underneath her wedding dress. And what a dress! Designed by Christian Dior, it was a breathtaking creation of silver brocade, tulle, and floating ostrich feathers. The train was 12 yards long, and the whole concoction weighed 40 pounds. During the ceremony, Soraya nearly fainted. The Shah saw her distress, and after the ceremony asked a lady-in-waiting to cut away part of the incredible skirt to lessen the weight. It was so full that nobody even noticed. At the great reception that night, Soraya wore some of Pahlavi crown jewels for the first time. Her tiara sparkled with diamonds. Round her neck were rows of emeralds. Great emerald drops hung from her ears, and one flawless green jewel on her finger caught the light. Everyone was talking about the wedding presents. The Russian dictator Stalin had sent the Shah a writing set studded with black diamonds, and for Soraya there was a snow-white Russian mink coat. After a 2-week honeymoon in a villa on the shores of the Caspian Sea, the couple were forced to return to Tehran, where a political crisis threatened. They had only been back 3 days when the Prime Minister of Iran was shot by fanatics while attending divine service in a mosque. His place was taken by Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, a virulent anti-monarchist whose ambition was to make himself dictator. The antics of this dangerous, emotionally unstable man threw Iran into chaos for the next 2.5 years and involved the Shah in a bitter row with Britain over the supply of Iranian oil. Under the influence of Mossadegh, Iran slid towards ruin and anarchy. The situation became so dangerous as Mossadegh's hysterical supporters yelled for the execution of the entire royal family that in August 1953 the Shah and Soraya fled to Rome. Mossadegh was finally ousted by the loyal general Zahedi, who gathered the support of the army. Once the situation had settled down, the royal couple returned to a jubilant welcome from the Iranian people. Trouble had brought the Shah and Soraya to an even deeper understanding. After the Mossadegh crisis, there were to be others, equally frightening. Iran was in a constant state of ferment, but there followed a period in which the royal couple were able to settle down to a more regular married life, to carry out their various social duties and to visit ordinary Iranians in their villages and homes. Both the Shah and Soraya loved sports. They swam, rowed and sailed together, played volleyball and learned to water ski. Like any other young couple, they enjoyed parties, fancy dress balls, private film shows and picnics. Late in 1954, they set out on a series of state visits to Britain, Germany and the United States. Everywhere, Soraya was admired and photographed, and everywhere people were asking the same question. When was she going to give the Shah the son and heir he desperately needed? There could be no official coronation of the Empress until a crown prince had been born. After 4 years of marriage, the cradle remained empty. To show his faith in her, Mohammad Reza told Soraya that he intended to have a crown specially designed for his Empress. One day, he took her to the Melli Bank, the national bank where the crown jewels are kept, and helped her to choose the precious stones to go in it. Soraya comforted herself with the thought that her own mother had to wait 6 years for her arrival. Doctors she consulted assured her that it was quite possible that this kind of thing ran in families. She must be patient. Worry would only make matters worse. But the Shah, ruling over such a volatile country and with many jealous and ambitious men around him, could not afford to wait. At 35, after 15 years and 2 marriages, he still had no heir to the throne. He gently suggested to his queen that they should both undergo medical examinations. She agreed, and on 8th December 1954, they booked into the Presbyterian Medical College in New York. For 3 days, they were both given a thorough checkup. All tests proved that they were perfectly normal. The doctors saw no reason why they should not have children. Queen Soraya was told to go home and be patient. For some time, the Shah did not refer to the subject of his heir. They threw themselves into good works and charitable causes, hoping the problem would resolve itself. On 3rd April 1957, he appointed a new Prime Minister, Dr. Manachur Iqbal, a university professor of whom great things were expected. He was full of new ideas. A few days after his appointment, Dr. Iqbal asked for an audience with the Shah. He spoke quietly but firmly. Your Majesty, if I am to undertake reform in your name, your own authority must be unassailable. Either the Empress must present you with an heir in the near future, or the dynasty's future must be assured in some other way. Soraya by this time had given up hope. She knew that if she was to hold on to her marriage, she would have to suggest a solution. At first, she thought of Princess Shahnaz, the Shah's daughter. Could she be nominated Crown Princess? There was also the possibility of choosing one of Shah's half-brothers. Haggard and distraught at the thought of losing her, the Shah decided to call his council of wise men together to discuss what could be done. He advised Soraya to await the outcome of discussions which were held in Europe so that she would not be around to be hurt. She agreed to go to skiing at St. Moritz. On 13th February 1958, almost 7 years to the day since their wedding, Queen Soraya kissed her husband goodbye, walked through a guard of honor to the waiting plane, and turned for one last look. They were never to meet again. Day after day, Soraya waited in Switzerland to see what the outcome of the wise men's discussion would be. She spoke to the Shah on the telephone, but it was no consolation. He sounded so forlorn. After a month, 3 emissaries from Tehran arrived to see her. The only glimmer of hope they gave her was that she could remain empress if she agreed to the Shah taking a second wife who could give him an heir. He was entitled to do this under Islamic law. Would she agree? Soraya gazed at the 3 anxious faces. Her eyes filled with tears and she shook her head. A few days later, the Shah announced the divorce with great sorrow. There was no doubting the Shah's grief. He looked as if his heart was breaking. Soraya, inconsolable for a time, threw herself madly into the mainstream of jet-set life. She was seen with film stars and playboys. Her name was linked with princes and millionaires. She was always on the move and never seemed to smile. She would never speak of the past. 18 months after they had parted, the Shah married Faradiba, and she gave him the heir he longed for. But as fate would have it, they too eventually were forced into a bitter exile when the Ayatollah overthrew the Shah, leaving the peacock throne unoccupied.